Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of Rovers Chat, the last one of the season, joined as ever by Robbie. Robbie, how are we doing?
Yeah, all good, Ricky. Thank you.
Good stuff. Only one place to start. Retained list. Just come off the presser. Quite an interesting one. Grant McCann might not want to kind of elaborate on the retained list, but we can obviously talk about it. And I think largely no real surprises was there really of the excuse me, of the seven that got released. Obviously, we knew about Billy Sharp already, but the other six, kind of, I think three of them out on loan, the other three pretty much on the fringes, all kind of played varying roles in the title win. But yeah, not massively surprised by any of them, were you?
No, not necessarily surprised by the names in there. More surprised by the timing, as you've said, to announce a retain list and then not want to talk about said retain list is a little bit sort of strange. If you don't want to talk about it, why not wait until the season's done to announce it, sort of thing. But it is what it is. I think the names on it, three of them, as you said, out on loan. I think everybody expected that Hurst, Westbrook, and Sabara had played their last games for Doncaster Rovers. The other three have all played their part, whether it's in the short, medium, or longer term recently. I think you look at James Maxwell, 4 years at the club, he's seen just about everything, as has Ben Close. I think the unfortunate thing for Maxwell in particular is that for so much of Grant McCann's time at the club, he and Senior were neck and neck, really, weren't they? There wasn't much between them. Maxwell, if anything, was slightly ahead of Senior for much of the last couple of seasons. But since maybe Boxing Day of this term, Jack Senior's form has meant that James Maxwell's barely kicked a ball in anger. So that one, again, probably made the decision easier for Grant McCann. I think Ben Close, on his day, can be a very good footballer. I think his injury record, though, and through no fault of his own, he's had some real sort of freak injuries during his 5 years at Doncaster Rovers. But 78 league starts in 5 years. I mean, you're averaging 15 a season. That's just not enough in terms of availability for where Doncaster Rovers want to go next season. And Jordan Gibson as well, he had a good year in League Two last season, 6 goals. I think he's matched that tally this time around, but not scored in 22 league games heading into the final day against Peterborough. So again, you need more than that, don't you? If you want to be going towards the top end of the division, you need more consistency from your wingers. Luke Molyneux, I think, is prime example. 15 goal contributions this season while carrying a double hernia. So what could he have produced had he not had that problem? And then, I suppose not one that's been released, but Glenn Middleton being added, I suppose, to the transfer list in old terms, if you like. And I've said this on another interview as well with Adam on Football Heaven last night, that it's almost an acceptance that is a deal that Rovers got wrong last summer. To be 12 months in and saying, he's available to move on, seems like a nod in the direction of maybe it just hasn't quite worked out. We've seen flashes, haven't we, from Middleton, particularly at Rotherham away, where he looked unplayable for 45 minutes. But that is all it's been with respect to him. It's just been, little shots here and there of what he can do. He scored on New Year's Day against Bolton, but that's his only goal in 46 appearances, which again, if Rovers are serious about pushing on and competing towards the top end of a competitive League One next season, they need the wingers to be producing more often than not.
Yeah, I think good point you make there about kind of Middleton. He's kind of flattered to deceive, hasn't he, really? He started the season and you're thinking, well, I always thought he started the season, I thought he played really well. And I always noticed that he'd dig a cross out whenever you think, oh, it's going to be charged down or he's going to run out of track, if you like. But he always tended to get the crosses in. Like you said, that Rotherham game, he was one of the 3 subs, I think he was, at half time with might have been Hanlon and somebody else. You'll probably be able to recall it better than me, but it's just fits and bursts, weren't it, with him? And like you say, it's probably an acceptance that kind of deal, because obviously he's got a year left. That deal didn't work out. It'd be interesting as well to see what his next step is, and also those on the retain list, because you look there, some pedigree amongst those players, isn't there? Just because they don't fit in for Rovers doesn't mean that, they're finished. I can certainly see some teams taking a gamble, or gamble if you want to use that word, on Maxwell. Obviously, his injury records, it's not been brilliant, has it, the last few years? Close is another one. You get him fit, and he's certainly got talent. So, but yeah, the byproduct of that is opportunities now for them to not rebuild, but there's a fair old job on in the summer, isn't there? And I know we'll come on to that in a future episodes, but I kind of just lightly touching on that. You look at the squad as it is now, and presuming Senior stays on. I've got it up on my screen now. There's only 3 attackers contracted. That's Molyneux, Hanlon, and Delican. A dearth of, a glut of midfielders, central midfielders. So I guess where do you think's the obvious, points for Rovers to kind of focus on in recruitment?
Well, when you look at the goalkeeping situation, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? The 2 goalkeepers that will be departing, that have been on loan, are both contracted to their parent clubs next season. So there isn't an easy route there in terms of saying, well, one's a free agent, so maybe that would make things easier. And all the way down the middle of the pitch, with it, exception to middle of midfield, I think you're looking at goalkeeper, centre half, striker. Rovers need strength in all of those positions. I think centre half, yes, they have got bodies in there, but I still think they need that real leader to come in and almost guide them at both ends of the pitch when it comes to set pieces as well. We all know Rovers are crying out for a striker who can get 10, 12, 15 goals a season, like a Rob Street, who we've seen in 12 months ago do just that. And although he's not there anymore, somebody of that ilk. And then the flanks as well, the fact that they're allowing Middleton to leave, Gibson's leaving, it leaves them very short. There is only really Molyneux as an out-and-out winger now at the football club, when you think about what he can produce. And yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you're looking and although you wouldn't describe it quite as an overhaul, Rovers are going to need a fair few bodies in the summer, and you could be looking at double figures in terms of incomings, and certainly 6 or 7 that need to be able to go straight into the starting 11 and get the ball rolling from minute 1.
Yeah, and just on the return list as well, we're not sure about the loanees again. It's a pretty odd press conference today. Kind of no clarity offered on whether they're still at the club or whether they'll be involved. The other kind of tidbit to come out of the return list was that Harry Clifton obviously had an extension option, which they've triggered. I'm just looking at the list. So the other 3 were Jacob Bryant, obviously the young goalkeeper, Will Flint, which I think many would probably agree with. It'd be good to have a proper look at him, and Bobby Faulkner, which is the one where I like to look back at the stats. He's not played for Rovers since 2023 October, so we're getting on for 2.5 years since he last played a senior game, and I don't even think he's played in friendlies during the 2 intertwining summers. So, obviously he's got a job to do at Harrogate this weekend, but once that's done, he'll come back into the reckoning, you'd have thought. Clifton's the standout one there. Right decision for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing that Harry Clifton gives you is legs in that midfield, and particularly away from home in a game where, and Rovers might have a fair few of these next season, where you don't necessarily have all of the ball and you need to dig in a little bit and have bodies who can get around the pitch. I think Clifton is very good at that. He was the third one, I think, when we were thinking about who was coming on at Rotherham. I think it was Clifton, Hanlon and Middleton off the bench.
Good memory.
And I think that type of player in League One is effective, and he chips in with the odd goal. I know he hasn't scored as many this term as he did last, but he's an effective player. Maybe not so much in that sort of number 10 role. I think that's where he's been used, a lot of the time. But I think in that midfield, he then allows Bailey to get forward and does a lot of the work that people maybe don't see. So certainly made sense. I think the Faulkner one's a really interesting one. 21 years of age now. He's not started a league game since Grant came back to the club in 2023, which is remarkable, really, given that I think he'd made 20 or something league appearances up to that point, when still very young. He's played 25 games for Harrogate this season with a fairly big injury in the middle of that. So I suppose in Rovers thinking it's sort of 21 years of age. If he can avoid injury, he's coming towards, some of his best years. Still very young, of course, but if they don't take up this option, he goes somewhere else and he has a full season and he's a really good defender. and then potentially they've lost out on an academy product blossoming at Doncaster Rovers. I can see the thinking behind it, although it does seem a little bit strange in terms of he's not played for Rovers for so long. Is he now coming to the point where, barring any injuries, that he's turning into the centre half Rovers potentially thought he would be? I see good things from Harrogate when you're looking at their sort of social media feeds and what their fans are saying. I think he's sort of got a lot of experience on young shoulders. If they do stay up, that'll be a great experience for him at the weekend. Fingers crossed they do. It's always good to see that sort of local team-ish staying in the Football League and doing well, isn't it? And especially when you've got a Rovers loanee there, it will be good for him to play his part. But I think it is time that he comes back into the reckoning and almost tries to stamp his authority on this squad and perhaps shows Grant McCann that not as much work he's doing at centre-half as we might have thought originally.
Yeah, be an interesting one, won't it? Just kind of, briefly again, we'll touch on it because the season's coming to a close. Obviously, Peterborough Saturday. Possibility, I think, for Rovers to finish. I don't think they can finish top half. I think 13th at a push. 60 points would be a good, a good return. I think. How would you kind of sum it up? Because I think if you'd offered fans the fact that you'll not be in, relegation bother come the last few games of the season, a couple of good cup runs, Spurs away, ran Southampton, who finished obviously as semi-finalists, ran them really close in the FA Cup. Got to got to within a game of the trophy final. I know a few fans are kind of contentious about that. But yeah, what's your kind of reflections on this campaign as a whole?
I think overall it's been a solid return to League One. If you'd have offered Rovers fans this position at the start of the season, I think everybody would have taken it. When Grant McCann shoots for the stars, it can be easy to fall into that trap of thinking that they should have done more. And potentially they could have been higher, but I think when you look at the teams competing for a playoff place, and even better, the teams that have gone up, they've all, barring one or two, got really good budgets, big clubs, ex-Premier League clubs, some of them as well. So I think for Rovers' first year back, it represents a solid return. If they can get to 60 points, if they can finish, 13th maybe, then I think that will be a success. I think at the start of the season, if you'd have said Rovers are going to finish somewhere between 10th and 14th, people probably would have said that's about right. They have had the cup heroics of a trip to Spurs and of course that comeback that almost was against Southampton. And you mentioned the EFL trophy. I do wonder if Grant maybe thinks, looking back, had he gone with his big hitters from the start, Rovers may well have been playing at Wembley. But the recovery post-Christmas has been impressive. It gives Rovers momentum. I think it's something like 10 wins since the turn of the year. I really enjoyed the second half against Stevenage on Saturday. I thought it looked like a team who did have something to play for. It looked like, Grant had really had a word in their ears at half-time because it was a little bit flat, wasn't it? And a bit, nice, if you like, in that opening 45 minutes against a Stevenage team who love that physical battle and can really mix it with the best of them. But I think the way they came out after the break, I think we described it after the game, didn't we, as a sort of a Grant McCann type performance. They got after Stevenage, made it uncomfortable for them. And at this stage of the season, when you're going up against a team who are chasing the playoffs, it can be easy to almost roll over and think, well, our job's done. But it didn't look like that. It looked like two teams both competing for a place in the top six. So I think that as a final home game gave everybody that encouragement. There were signs in terms of Adelican's impact in the second half. The couple of step overs and the way he skipped by his man for Sharp's goal was really good. And I think that probably typified the second half of the season. There have been so many flashes of brilliance, maybe not all in sort of close proximity. It's been a little bit hit and miss at times this season, but I think it's given Grant McCann a really good idea of where the level's at, because Rovers had 3 or 4 years out of it before they came back in. He'd not managed at League One level for a couple of years either, it's worth remembering. So I think it's given him a chance to see where the bar is, see what type of characters you need, and he's been pretty honest with us, hasn't he? I think he sort of said that 40% of the dressing room didn't believe enough, which is remarkable, really, to almost say that half of the dressing room didn't really think that Rovers could go on and kick on this year, when he very much did. I think next season, if Rovers are to be successful, they need 99% of that dressing room to be following the trend and really trying to push Rovers up in the third tier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I say, I agree with all of that. I think it's just not missed opportunity, but that period where when they were in that rotten run of one winning 16 or whatever it was at the end. I think he said it before, Grant. Even if you chuck 2 or 3 wins in there, the complexion of the season is kind of completely different. And if you'd have kind of you know mashed it all together, that run they started with and the run they went on, if you intersperse them together, it wouldn't have had as negative, I think, connotations towards it as it did have, because that run they were on, and by the way, I think any other club would have probably changed manager. I think a lot of clubs would have changed manager at which we spoke about before. I think it says a lot for the kind of credit in the bank that Grant's got, and the supporters understanding what he's trying to do. So I think certainly things to kind of reflect on and also learn from. And like I say, I think as a first year back though, you can't really grumble with it too much. 60 points if they win on Saturday, which is, I'm just looking at the table now. They're not going to obviously get 12 because Wycombe's goal difference, but it'd be nice to finish above Barnsley as well, wouldn't it, on the last day. We'll move on then to quite a fun topic. Well, some of them are fun. Your questions then from on Twitter or X. We'll start off with a fun one, which I've kind of half answered on Twitter, but Dan McKay has put or asked favourite kit out of the 4 that we've had this season in order. And I think anyone who's watched this will know my thoughts on that pink kit. That's finishing 5th for me in a 4-horse race. I don't mind the home kit. I think it's all right. The blue's quite different, isn't it, this season? I like the green one, the 4th kit, the green one, the foundation strip. I quite like that, so I'll put that second, and then third is the blue, the away kit. What about you?
Yeah, not to be boring, but I think I did like the green one. It just a bit something different, isn't it? It sort of reminded me of the shirt that Rovers wore when they won promotion at Brentford. James Coppinger scoring the winner. So yeah, it did remind me a little bit of that. And I think that the home one, good. I always think from a commentator's point of view, I always look at the numbers on the back. I think if they're clear, if I can see them, happy days. There's been some absolutely horrendous shirts, not from Rovers' point of view, but some opponents, so I won't name. But you're literally squinting and trying to see what names and numbers are on there, and that does a lot of our job for us. If we can see names and numbers, happy days. So I almost focus sometimes on the back of the shirt as much as I do the front. And I think, with respect where it's due, the Rovers shirts this season have been fairly clear. And let's hope that next season that continues. If anyone's listening in the Oxon department, they're planning their shirts at the moment, then just a nice clear back of the shirt always goes a long way.
Yeah, I agree with that. Another Twitter question. So I think this is quite a good one. Any players who stood out for you from opposition teams who you would like Rovers to sign? They've suggested Jaden Wareham from Exeter, which I think is a really, don't know how doable that would be. I think we were having that conversation as we walked down to the ground at Exeter, weren't we, about how he's probably on his way off for a pretty penny. But yeah, I think for me, judging it on when I watched them at the time, I thought Barnsley's clearer looked lively when Barnsley played Donny. Yeah. And then I think Martha for Rotherham, I know he's kind of took a nosedive since then. I'd have to rack my brains with that one. Is any that jump off the page for you?
It's a challenge, isn't it, when somebody says who's the best player you've seen and you're trying to think of the games you've seen. There's so many that almost blur into one. I think Wareham, for his size and the way he almost bullied the Rovers defenders, I think that was the most impressive thing about him, because he's not the biggest, but his movement and his willingness to put body on body and almost get himself into areas was really, really impressive. As you said, he's not going to be going anywhere cheap, is he? Especially if Exeter stay up, he's going to cost a few quid. Same with Reyes Cleary. Sounds like in January, most of the Championship were chasing him from Barnsley. I saw him score the best goal I've seen live this season at Bradford, from inside his own half. And I'm not kidding, the ball went so high and then somehow landed in the back of the net. I'm sure everybody who's watching has seen that goal. But yeah, in terms of highlights of the season, that goal was unlike anything I've ever really seen before. I think it's hard, isn't it, in terms of individual players? Like I think Jamie Reid for Stevenage, just thinking about more recent games, Reid's really robust and scores goals, gets himself into areas where he can be a threat. I think Kemp just off him. Often you get sort of a couple of players, don't you, for each team who really stand out. I really like Adam Phillips at Barnsley as well. While we're talking about Cleary, I think his goal record from midfield, I think it's double figures in each of his last 4 seasons. And I think I do like seeing sort of different players who maybe you've not seen for a little while. And it's easy when you're looking at team sheets, there's names you recognise, but sometimes it's the ones that you've maybe not seen play. Tyrese Shade, I remember him sort of coming on, I think, for Burton at their place. And just for a big guy, his feet were quick and he was causing problems. And the way he struck the ball was sort of quite emphatic. And I think it is sometimes the players that you've not necessarily seen a lot of that can sometimes surprise you. And I think there's been games where Rovers have perhaps been caught out a little bit by that. I think there was a winger at Wimbledon who was quite lively as well. And Keng, I think his name was, he caused Sterry 1 or 2 problems, didn't he, at their place?
Yeah, he did.
And I think it is those type of wingers in League One, if you can get them firing and get them top of the assist charts, it's worth noticing or naming another one at Exeter as well. You've sort of got me into a rabbit hole here, Ricky. The names are falling onto my head now. We're discussing them. I really like Ilmari Niskanen at Exeter. So the Finnish midfielder runs all day long, would chase a crisp packet on a windy day. He's everywhere. When you see him, watching the FL highlights every week, he's always involved down the right-hand side, whether he's creating a goal or he's just causing a nuisance of himself. I think he's a really big asset for Exeter. I'm not sure on his contractual sort of status down there, but if they are to go down, he won't be short of suitors either. I think there's some really good players who do go under the radar in League One. Not necessarily at the bigger clubs, the Cardiffs and teams like that. I do enjoy seeing the teams who are almost battling in that mid-table period, but you've got them gems really in the middle as well, and can show their quality, albeit not necessarily in a team that's firing at the top end.
Yeah, well, on that, I think for me, certainly away from home, Aaron Connolly, when Leyton Orient absolutely battered Donny, I think it was October time. I know Ballard scored 3, I think, that day, but Connolly's movement, and not sure whether he's tailed off a little bit or whether he got injured, but he looked every inch the Premier League player that day. And Talage is another one, I think, both games against Donny, especially the one where they obviously won 5-1 at the Eco. We could, like you said, we could be here all day picking out, opposition ones. But another question, this is from Henry on X again, this is quite an interesting one, Bailey and Molyneux. So the debate against keeping or selling Bailey and Molyneux, what price would you accept for both? Interested to hear what amount you would think. And again, it's very hard to answer that. I think the broad subject of, I personally think you can't afford to lose both. When I say that, I don't mean literally. I just think to lose both would be a big, big blow. And I don't think you could really say one would hinder them. Losing one would hinder them more than the other. I think they're both big characters, big assets. And Grant's comments, again, we don't know whether he was saying it just flippantly or because it's the truth, isn't it? They are the 2 best performers in the team and have been for some time. They will be attracting attention. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because, realistically, Owen Bailey's just had the season of his life. Is he going to do that again next year? I've been massively surprised. You look at their ages as well. They're both pushing 30. I know they're not quite there, but they're closer to 30 than they are 25. I suppose it's kind of, this summer is kind of, I would say, peak value for both.
Yeah, and I think it's so difficult, isn't it? Because both of those players have grown such a connection with the Doncaster Rovers supporters. And while ever it's so difficult to see players like that go, that is the modern game, isn't it? For clubs at this level to be able to survive and have that longevity of competing at a certain level, you are going to have to sort of speculate to accumulate and maybe put a bit more money into the playing budget to start climbing, but also sell well, if that makes sense. So sell at the right times, reinvest it into the playing squad, reinvest it into a new pitch at the Eco Power or new gym facilities, as we've seen at the Cantley Park training ground as well. And it's something Rovers haven't really managed to do over the last few years, with the exception of Ben Whiteman when he went to Preston for, probably, ballpark figure closing in on £2 million. At that point, did Rovers invest it well enough? No, because then they got relegated 18 months later to League Two. So that would show you that that money didn't really go towards making the team better. I think if you're to take Molyneux's goals and assists out, you're starting from scratch, aren't you, in terms of your attacking output? So much of what Rovers do going forward is through him, particularly when you then look at the wingers that Rovers are letting go. They've only got Hanlon centre forward, who's contracted. If you take Bailey out of it, you lose so much of the heart, I think, of your team. You lose Molyneux's quality and his work rate and his endeavour. But I think if you take Bailey out, you really are ripping the soul out of that team, because he can play in so many different positions. He chips in with goals. He's your captain. So many different reasons. But again, if the money's right, Rovers are in a position contractually. They've tied them both down. There's an option in Bailey's deal. They are the ones, holding all the power. And particularly when you've got a manager like Grant McCann, you know that he will do the right thing for the football club. You can trust in him. He's got a great relationship with Gavin Baldwin and Terry Bramall. There's a very, streamlined way of doing things, the same way that they bring players in. They'll be almost, I would imagine, anticipating worst case scenario, Molyneux and Bailey both go. That's not me saying that's going to happen, but they've got to have a plan for if that does happen. And if it does, Rovers could be, looking at £3 or £4 million through the door. Who knows? Again, that's me speculating on fees. It's unfair, I think, to put a figure on it and say Bailey's worth this much, Molyneux's worth this much, because ultimately they're worth as much as Rovers think they are. Whatever price tag they put on, they're not under any pressure to sell. They're financially in a strong position. The owner and the chairman, Terry Bramall, looked after them in the last couple of years. He's backed Grant McCann in a sensible way. They've not just thrown good money after bad. And I think it puts them in a position where they can go into the summer, they'll have their targets. And if someone does knock on the door and make an offer for your captain or your best, definitely your best attacking player, then they will have to have that conversation, because they are ultimately a League One club, averaging gates of 7,500, 8,000. You can't turn your nose up if you're getting seven-figure offers. And that is where the football club are at, and it's where so many other clubs are at. So an interesting one. I think we'll all look on from afar, and some a little bit closer than others. Everybody wants Luke Molyneux and Owen Bailey to be in a Doncaster Rovers shirt next season. Let's see when we're having this chat come middle of July, end of July, Ricky, if they still are.
Yeah, and you don't want it to become a saga as well, do you? If we get wind of Team X interested in one of them, I suppose if it's one of those, how Rovers do the business, and Grant's kind of look at the return list, how early that went out. I suppose that's kind of a prelude to getting people through the door early. If then you see your plans kind of unravel by having to sell one of them, late down the line, that's not ideal, is it? You'd like to think that any kind of business or sales will be brisk, just to help everything else in terms of planning.
Yeah, well, we've seen from the manager in the last couple of years, whether it's been with players who are out of contract, turning down deals or things like that, he just wants it done as quickly as possible and a swift sort of resolution found. I think the message will be to those players, if they have had interest. I'm sure if they have, the ball will already be rolling. We might not hear about it until a couple of months' time, but people talk, don't they, in football? Supporters aren't daft. They know that it happens probably from January onwards. If a player is wanted by a football club, conversations between agents and said club happens. I think from Grant's point of view, he will want clarity on it to start planning. The last thing you want is to bring 10 players in. You get to pre-season training and you think, right, this is exactly how we're going to play. And then a week in and you've got X club coming in saying, we want your captain or we want your winger. And then everything's, back where you started. You take a huge stride backwards and you've already done your recruitment. If it's going to happen, you want it to happen before you've signed too many players, and then you can go, right, let's do our recruitment based on that. he will want clarity. I think the football club will want clarity. And I think the players involved as well will have enough respect for the club and the manager and the people who've looked after them. And let's face it, Rovers have given Owen Bailey a lot, as much as he's given the football club in recent years. It's been a great sort of match, hasn't it? Luke Molyneux, after a tough first season with the football club, then became this unbelievable winger, the one that Rovers probably thought they'd signed 12 to 18 months prior. But there is that relationship between the two where honest conversations will be had. If there's interest, then they can, open door policy and decide what the best course of action is. And just because there is interest doesn't mean they're definitely going to go. It might not be the right fit for them. They're both very level-headed lads. They might be happy to wait another 12 months or another 6 months. We may see contracts put on the table for the pair of them and say, okay, well, listen, we know you might want to head for pastures new. We want to maximise the money we can get for you. Give us another 6 months and then let's see where we are. You see it so often throughout football, don't you? A new contract signed. Ben Whiteman did it at Doncaster Rovers. Just going back a few years, we've touched on him already. Signed a new deal. And then by the time the real strong, concrete interest came, Rovers were in a position where Whiteman still had sort of 2 years left on his deal. And then it's, okay, well, let's talk about a price, but we will decide ultimately what that is, not the buying club.
I think with Molyneux as well, it's interesting. Remember when he signed that contract? So when would that have been? 2 summers ago. I'm sure I remember him saying in one of the interviews about how he wants to be a legend at the club. So, and I can't imagine his stance will have changed too much since then, So, I don't know whether that points towards, him wanting to stay here long term. Like we said, we don't know the ins and outs of it, do we? But yeah, like you say, it's going to be it'll be a fascinating summer. But I certainly think Rovers are in a strong bargaining position, aren't they? In terms of if clubs come sniffing, they can certainly kind of, call the shots to a large extent.
Yeah, I think in recent years that it might have been as soon as the pound signs came that those players would have been off. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think the position the club are in means that, again, they can have that conversation. But if the deal's not right, if the players aren't 100% sure, then they'll be here next season. I think the option in Bailey's contract is significant. He's effectively got 2 years left at the football club. I think Molyneux only having 12 months is a sort of stick or twist time, isn't it? Does he sign a new deal with Rovers? Does he run his contract down? A lot can change in football. It's a couple of years now since he signed that new contract when Rovers had just missed out on promotion from League Two. He's then gone off the back of that, 31 goal involvements. He's won promotion as a League One title winner. Does he fancy a change? Who knows? Only Luke knows that, doesn't he? Or does he still have that mindset of wanting to become a legend? So we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding, won't it? But I think everybody hopes and sort of prays that for Rovers to kick on next season, you need those two to be in your starting 11 come August the 3rd or 4th or whatever it is.